is battling the UN-backed government in Somalia, and it's suspected of links to a string of attacks in the neighbouring Kenya. The group, which is linked to al-Qaeda, has been pushed out of most of the main towns it once controlled, but it remains a potent threat. Well, for more on the al-Shabab, we're joined in studio by Izak Khomo. He's a senior analyst and program producer at the SABC. Good afternoon, Mr. Khomo, and it's once again, it's a pleasure chatting to you.
Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to our listeners.
Look, there's more to me than meets the eye, Mr. Khomo. Ordinary Kenyans involved in the attacks in Lamu. How did the situation come about?
Well, the attacks in Lamu, that's a coastal area. There have been attacks in Lamu, there have been attacks in Mombasa. Now, these attacks, basically, they're al-Shabab linked, but basically they've been perpetrated by local Kenyans. And this comes out from discontent that has been there for a period of over 20 years, where we find now that there's a development plan. They're developing the port of Lamu, developing into a major port under a program was called the Lamu Port, Southern Sudan and Ethiopia corridor. And that has brought a lot of discontent. And I think the people have just been pushed towards al-Shabab through being marginalized and actually sort of seeing their lands being taken.
Are you saying that the actual discontent felt by people on the ground over the controversial land grabs to build this corridor has pushed them into the arms of al-Shabab?
In fact, that's exactly the same, because that's the truth. Because you find that this thing here, it started in Mombasa, where you had some clerics who were very, very pro-al-Shabab. Unfortunately, these clerics were actually killed, murdered, and people say these are extrajudicial killings by the security forces. And that has actually driven, radicalized the youths who are actually been driven towards al-Shabab.
What is it that actually drives al-Shabab, Izak? What are their core beliefs and ideology?
Well, al-Shabab, basically, they're Salafist, just like al-Qaeda. For a start, they are Salafist. And the Kenyan Muslims, they are Qadiriyas. These are Sufis, they zikir a lot. But now you find that the Qadiriyas have come and taken over the core mosques and areas. And basically, they want to bring in Sharia law in the areas that they want to control, to impose Sharia law. And also, they look at Kenya, the coast, being formerly a Muslim area, but now it's been coming to be dominated by, as they say, kafirs or non-Muslims.
How much of Somalia would you say that the al-Shabab now control? We know they no longer, they've relinquished control of most of the towns, but they're still quite dominant in the rural areas, aren't they?
They've not relinquished control of most of the town. They're still there in Afgoy. They've only lost the major towns are Kismayu and Mogadishu. But there are other towns in the interior that they still control. They're still a major force in the interior. And it's a job actually getting rid of them. And that, again, the removal of al-Shabab in places like Kismayu has brought in further problems within the local people, because the Kenyan forces, they're actually working together with the tribal militia of Madobe, the Kigamboni group, which basically they are not natives of the area.
Yes. Well, we know that al-Shabab was forced out of the capital, Mogadishu, in August 2011, and they left the vital port, like you've mentioned, of Kismayo in September 2012. Well, the loss of Kismayo has hit their finances, though, hasn't it? They did rely on the charcoal trade there.
Yes, they relied on the charcoal trade, and also the many trades that they control. One thing people should realize that Southern Sudan is the breadbasket of Somalia. And again, Southern Sudan, basically, it is an area which is the majority of the people are not ethnic Somalis. The majority of Southern Sudans are Bantu Somalis. These are African Somalis. And these are sedentary agriculturists. Now, with all the warlords and all groups that have been fighting, they're really fighting for the control of this very economic area. And whichever force that comes and controls that, they impose heavy taxes on the indigenous Bantu Somalis who are planters. And that's where they also get their revenues. With the charcoal trade, the Bantu Somalis have had their mango trees cut down and converted to charcoal. And that it's become a very big problem. And if you look at the refugee camps, the internally displaced people in Mogadishu, most of them are Bantu Somalis or Rahawain Digil, which are also a Bantu group of the Rahawain group.
There have been some internal rifts within the al-Shabab lately with its leader, Ahmed Godane. He was responsible for the group's tie-in with al-Qaeda, and he has an international agenda, as opposed to his main rival, Sheikh Hassan Dair Awais, who's more focused on the struggle within Somalia.
Yeah, Awais basically comes from Izak. But with this rift, basically, people say that al-Shabab is a rift on clan lines. Whereas the gentleman who is splitting, they say that it's more connected to the Hawiya group, which is where the president comes from. And this is the thing whereby it's just horse trading, whereby they're being offered space to come and to be accommodated. And that is happening. But again, al-Shabab is still a force within southern Somalia.
To be reckoned with. We've seen in the mall attack, we've seen the coastal attacks. Are we seeing al-Shabab really becoming more well orchestrated, more tactical and more aggressive in their strategy?
I think al-Shabab has passed their zenith in terms of being tactical. Right now you find that they've gone to the terrorist groups because al-Shabab actually expanded. I mean, to say they became sophisticated, that it had a standing army where they could actually take on a standing force and fight it back, you know, on a conventional warfare. But now they're reverting back to terrorist method of bombings, which shows that their military options are getting less and less.
Thank you, Mr. Khomo. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Moving on to other news, Israel's